Good afternoon. It's my privilege to introduce to you Tia Roberts Hartsock. Tia is an independent consultant, a researcher, and evaluator in criminal justice and mental health systems for nonprofit State Department and federal agencies. She's been an adjunct lecturer at the University of Hawaii School of Social Work and lectures in both the bachelor's and master's program. She received her master's in criminal justice administration from Chaminade University with a specialization in juvenile justice and her master's in social work from the University of Hawaii with a specialization in mental health. Most recently, she was a project director on two separate federal initiatives with SAMHSA to develop and provide mental health services for adolescents involved in juvenile justice, mental health, and the child welfare systems. In those capacities, she has overseen multi-agency collaborations to improve Hawaii's mental health systems of delivery for trauma survivors from a gender-specific and trauma-informed foundation. She is a certified trainer by SAMHSA's Gain Center on Trauma-Informed Care. In addition to her 20 years of work to improve child and adult serving systems in Hawaii, Ms. Hartsock has provided numerous trauma-informed trainings to professionals and community during the COVID pandemic. She is a bright light within our Koʻolaupoko community. Please welcome Ms. Tia Roberts Hartsock.
Wow, that was very nice. Mahalo for that. Thank you. Aloha, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon. It is my intense honor to be here with you and share this afternoon for the next 55 now minutes on a Monday afternoon. So thank you for the opportunity to connect. Thank you to Compassionate Koʻolaupoko for the opportunity to share. I really appreciate it. I will go ahead and start right off. If I can screen share and get going. So like Nathan was saying, we are going to look at what it means in the context of working with adolescents specifically to be a caring adult, a trusted adult in a youth's life, and how that impacts relationships, how that impacts development. There's evidence around that specifically point out elements to influence outcomes, educational outcomes, health outcomes, specifically for adolescent youth. And then of course, I have to get in there some trauma-informed care information on how we can create the framework and how this all falls within the principles of trauma-informed care, and how we all can be a part of creating compassionate and resilient communities. It's kind of how I like to look at it. So mahalo to everyone again for being here, and thank you guys so much for doing this work. What an honor. So today is just an overview and agenda of what we're going to be covering. It's really looking at just how to build trust. What is trust? What does it mean to be a trusting adult? Is a very, something we use. Oh yeah, I trust them. I trust her. I trust him. I trust our government, or I don't trust our government. What does this mean? What does this mean right now in the global context, as well as in our day-to-day and interpersonal lives as we interact and weave throughout youth's lives, and our own friends and family as well, obviously. And then spend a little bit of time on specifically addressing what trauma-informed care efforts are looking like in Hawaii. And then wanted to provide a question and answer opportunity. So comments, all those types of things. I am not the one who has all the answers. So hopefully we can spark a discussion. And I just heard my 5-year-old come home. So we will shut the door very soon. If we can go ahead and get started. Can you shut the door, please? Thank you. Shut the door. Thanks. We can get started on, this is what it means to work from home, guys, right? We can get started on introductions. I really just wanted to get an idea and get you folks get all of us in the frame of who we are, what we're bringing, but more specifically and what we have as a remembering back to our adolescence. And adolescence is the time, right, defined between like 10 years old to 19, the second decade of our lives. Think back to then. Think back to when we were 10 to 19 years old. Some of us, it's been a hot minute. For others, it was not that long ago. So think about a person in your life that you trusted, and however you're defining that word, and what was their role? What was their role in which they were involved in your life? So if you could go to the chat box really quickly and just kind of write in whatever comes to your mind. An adult you trusted, who you are, your name first, adult you trusted, and what role they played in your life. And let's go ahead and everybody kind of turn to that chat box and see what people are writing, to get an idea of what that means to all of us. Grandmothers, dads, mothers, youth worker at church. I love it. I love it. Look at all that. Awesome. So when we think, the first thing that comes to our mind, right, is fond memories oftentimes, right? We think about these people, we think, wow, what a time, adolescence. That was fun for some and not so fun for others. A lot happening during this decade of youth's lives, and how it develops through the brain, how things and pathways get hardwired, how behaviors and responses to environments continue to inform the way in which we interact with others throughout our lives, is very much so informed by what happens in our adolescence. So thank you for, if everybody's looking in there, there's a lot of cool things that people are saying. You might even have somebody on this call that is your colleague or your family that you can state. I see a couple of people that are old colleagues of mine and dear friends of mine, who very much informed the way in which I was able to develop relationships in working environments. So thank you for that. You know who you are. When we look at compassionate and resilient communities, and we think about what that means, and we're really, this is compassionate Koʻolaupoko. So of course we're going to look at Koʻolaupoko and what does it mean to develop a resilient community? What does that mean to lead with compassion and love and aloha? And how does it look when we're doing it through a framework? And whatever framework that is we choose. Of course, I'm looking always at the trauma-informed care framework, but there's many frameworks to look at. But when we're looking at principled approaches to how we interact with youth, how we interact with ourselves, and how we interact with our families, right? Our neighbors. It's very much oftentimes this natural, authentic interaction that we try and come with and we lead with compassion, like we're talking about. But everybody has bad days. Everybody has difficult times, right? Everyone now has continued global pandemic that we're still working through. So how do we really think about building compassionate communities, resilient communities, and how does that look from each individual household to the next? And when we're looking at the Koʻolaupoko district and trying to influence the way in which we provide resources, provide support for our kids and our families and ourselves within these communities, it becomes really a great conversation, right? This is a great conversation. Typically in trauma-informed care, we have the principles, whereas trustworthiness and transparency is one of the principles. So what an awesome opportunity for me to really dive deep into what that means specifically when working in communities. The one thing that I love to do, as I'm sure if you've ever attended a training, is really start this off with reflecting. So first we started off with reflecting on a trusted adult, what that meant to us. We had these memories of what that person brought to our lives, how we developed trust with them. But now I want you folks to, again, kind of reflect internally and see when we're showing up for kids, when we show up for our families, right? When we show up for at work, for our colleagues and our supervisors and our own staff. How are we showing up? And that's a big reflection to continually do. This is the Lokahi Wheel developed by Kamehameha Schools several years ago for educational purposes. I love this visual. I love to think of it as a balance, as a pie in my life, to think about what I need to be focusing on throughout the day, throughout the weeks, throughout the months, as I move, sometimes float through my daily activities. And oftentimes you're just kind of making unconscious decisions left and right and interacting with people, not as much now in person, but even through Zoom. And how are we showing up? Today was a little hectic for me. My weather, my school and thinking, my feelings and emotion was kind of all over the place. I was running late on several meetings and was last minute with this, and really thinking about how will we use this opportunity to have an interaction with folks that are passionate about being a healthy community. Initially, first, how do we be a role model? How do we provide mentorship and be that trusted adult? The first thing that happens is our ability to role model emotional intelligence. How do we read everybody else? How are we able to connect with their emotion? How do we create empathy and identify the emotions that others are having so that we can connect with them on that level? It, to me, all starts with being able to reflect that ourselves. How well are we able to reflect on what our own emotional needs are at any given moment, and how that shows up in our daily lives with all the other domains that are vying for our time and attention, right? Our family knocking at the door, trying to get in at the, our animals that are hungry and waiting for us to feed them and bring them clean water, all of the things that our bodies that are slowly deteriorating as the days go by, as we're sitting in front of a computer. How do we balance and pay attention? And this all has to do with emotional well-being, believe it or not, right? And modeling and role modeling that balance to youth becomes really part of this larger framework on how to create trusted relationships, which ultimately leads to healthier communities. The more trusted relationships we have, the deeper we're connected with people and within our own lives and ourselves. Starts with us and ends with healthier communities. So just take a moment in that conversation to reflect on what your Lokahi Wheel looks like. We're in the middle end of March. Some of you folks are on spring break, some of you are not. How does your Lokahi Wheel look like? What does that image of a balanced wheel for my purposes, we're using that, look for you in your life in the last week? Is your life relatively balanced? Are you paying attention to these domains? Is there any area that's overtaking and overpowering the other domains in your life? And if it is, how do we take note, take stock, and balance throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month? Some little practice, reflective practice I like to do on a regular basis. Before my body starts to tell me I need to go exercise, or before my family tells me I need to pay attention to them, or before work and school take over too much of this pie. How do we reflect and be proactive about getting this balanced so that we can, and then in turn, then role model it to the youth and families we work with, and our families and youth as well, right? When we're looking at building resilience in a community, really looking at what that framework looks like and how to conceptualize that on a day-to-day basis throughout our interactions. We think about resilience and we think about building resilience in kids. We individualize that oftentimes. How do we help that one child feel more resilient? there's lots of protective factors. There's lots of way to do it. There's lots of research and studies that are being conducted. But this was an interesting one that an article that came up that was really look at reconceptualizing what relationships and resilience means, not necessarily as an individual from that individual perspective, but when we're trying to build community, we're trying to create health and well-being within that community. How do we developmentally look at that within a community context? What resilience means? What did those experiences look like? And what's present in that community as a whole, right? So how do we create that by looking at, according to this article, and these folks who did some studies on it, it was really looking at whether the community itself, what elements they have in practice and in policies and whatnot, what's available in terms of relationships and resources, and what kind of commitment does that community have to building resilience, but particularly to the individualized and group needs of youth in that community. Are we focused to build resilience as a community, or are we focusing on building resilience on each and every one of those little, individuals within that community? I don't think there's no right or way, a wrong way to view it, but this is arguing as a function of developmental experiences, we're really trying to look at it within the community context, building up through resources and through elements that are present, alive, and breathing in that community, right? Centers, activities, opportunities, kupuna that are in the community that people know and trust and have engaged within social activities within those environments for decades. And how fortunate are we to have many in our Koʻolaupoko community that we can easily identify. But how do we really prioritize and make that a deliberate move within our communities that youth are the priority, that developing youth is our priority as the Koʻolaupoko community, that we have resources available, that we have lots of different types of what the environment looks like, playgrounds, skate parks, right? All those types of things. Is there a focus on youth resilience building and inclusion and healthy ways of being as a community? Even the language we use within our businesses, right? Are they inclusive to youth as well? Because oftentimes I immediately think of communities, and if you're part of the planning and development in the state of Hawaii, I'm not trying to be offensive, but even those little, those bumps on benches, right, that basically are saying no skateboarding on here, or no sleeping on this bench, or I understand the policy, I get it. That's why skate parks are provided, right? So they start with the mitigation of those types of activities that youth typically engage in, and then they provide, and then healthy communities will provide the alternative, right? You see communities that are in impoverished neighborhoods and high-risk youth in big urban areas that see a lot of graffiti, and then they provide, here's the space provided on this building, or this is the platform in which you can provide, you can spray paint, or here's art nights. That is the response, right? To provide pro-social activities for youth that create healthier communities. So how do we really look at building and creating resilient communities and compassionate communities? I love this idea of how everybody has a role, right? And we think of what it means to have a role in our community. What is our role? How would someone describe us in our community as a practitioner, an advocate, a parent, a friend, a partner? But within our own homes, how do we build resilience within ourselves? And to me, I can't make Josh do it. I can't make, Dennis Dennis, do this to build resiliency in the kids, or Laura to do it. Here's what we do, 1, 2, 3. But if we start with ourselves, right, and we really think about making this a deliberate action on a day-to-day basis within ourselves first, within our homes, and then within our neighborhoods, and build eventually to our within the community level, it becomes very, very simple. It's like pass it on kind of a thing. And so as I'm moving towards the content and thinking about how this looks within a trauma-informed framework, here's the trust and transparency, right? So as the 6 principles of trauma-informed care are safety, trustworthiness, peer support, collaboration, empowerment, voice and choice, and then cultural, historical, and gender issues. When we think about that framework and how as a comprehensive framework that looks, you pull any of those out and expand and focus on them within a programmatic structure, you can't really go wrong. What they're arguing with this trauma-informed framework is that collectively and coupling all these together creates this approach that will provide support, safety, build relationships, build resilience, and whatnot. So for those who haven't heard of trauma-informed care or looked at the principles, this is really what it is part of, and where it's steeped in within the trauma-informed care framework is developing trustworthiness, which is right alongside of transparency. So if any of you have worked with kids, the authenticity that comes through when you work with kids, when you are authentic, or when you see someone who's not authentic, kids immediately know. Youth are like, I don't know, they might not be able to say, oh, that person's not being authentic, but they know what that means, right? They know what it means to come with authenticity and to be genuine and to be transparent of why you're there and what your passion is and what your intent is. And it doesn't necessarily say, oh, you know, I'm done at 4:30. It's 4:30, so Paul, please don't talk to me anymore, or this session is over. Not that I'm advocating for people working overtime every day by any means, but what does it mean to really be present? And what does it mean to be available in the context of still having boundaries? It's possible. It's challenging, but it's possible, right? Because you folks do it every day. So within this framework of trauma-informed care principles, trust and transparency is a huge one, not only on an organizational level, but even on that one-on-one, even as a community. What are we doing as a community? What is the traffic mitigation process right now? I know I live in Wamanalo, and we have, you know, our traffic was being addressed through different public meetings. And how do we create transparency when Department of Transportation comes and presents and has information to share with the neighborhoods? Do we trust? Do we create trustworthiness with the very first interaction with Department of Transportation? And how well do they do that? And there's concerted efforts, which is so awesome to see, to create more transparency and trust within those types of governmental structures. We have work to do, but that will never end. So when we're really thinking about adolescence, getting back to the concept on building trust, when we're thinking about it, again, this is the 10 to 19. I'm really kind of focusing on the 10 to 19-year-olds in this conversation, and looking at this increased time of taking risks. This is the time that is heavy on risk taking. And oftentimes in the foster care system, if any of you folks have ever worked in Department of Human Services or worked with contracted providers for foster youth as a resource caregiver or in any capacity, how do we allow kids to take risk? Healthy risk. It is critical to let kids take healthy risk. And that even means, and I don't mean healthy risk by, you know, I saw a couple kids the other day skateboarding down Makapu. And I was like, I'm not sure if that constitutes healthy risk. It's sports, but skateboarding down the hike, trail when there's no barrier on the side of the mountain, I just was like, I can't even look. Go ahead, have fun. I'm not even looking. Because the risk taking at this age is much higher, primarily because it's fun and our brains aren't necessarily fully developed to take that risk into account on whether or not it's life-threatening as much as it is when we're older, right? That's the prefrontal cortex that develops. And so while they're in this adolescence, this idea of pruning takes place, right? And these behaviors start to get hardwired into our brains, our preferences, what skills we have, what kind of activities we enjoy. And it's all very helpful to be able to take healthy risk and to be able to test those things out. So not avoiding any kind of risk taking, but taking an measured effort, right? An ability to have healthy risk taking and allowing our kids and supporting them through that process. And the developing brain, right? We all know, but to be reminded by the developing brain at this stage and this age is very vulnerable to stress factors, right? They're not as resilient to managing and regulating and coping with stress. So as good as we are at doing it, think back to when we were adolescents. How well were we able to cope with, oh, I don't know, a fight within our friendship group or a breakup? And if we think back to what that felt like when we were in high school and junior high, devastation, right? The world is ending. And so really understanding that stress and even the concept of bullying, it's so stressful for kids, and for them to be able to manage it by themselves and navigate those really highly important experiences as a child, having a trusted adult and someone that they can turn to in times of chaos, in times of hurt, in times of stress, becomes critical. When we're talking about emotional well-being, which is typically what we focus on within the array of well-being, physical well-being, obviously, but emotional well-being, there was a study done several years ago that was looking at suicide attempts in high school students. And they were saying that although one of the most important relationships for youth is parents or parent types of adults, parental caregivers, relationships with caring and trustworthy adults at school, as well as in the community, right? But at school specifically, significantly reduce the likelihood of a suicide attempt. If we have an adult that we trust, that is, you know, that youth are able to identify and feel safe with, that they can work through and talk and be vulnerable with, it is an extremely effective protective factor for a lot of youth. And when we're looking at how that trust is built, several studies have obviously done, many studies. There's this one very recent one that was done. It's the reflections of adults working with high school age youth in project-based programs. So across the country, they looked at several youth organized project-based organizations like after-school programs, positive pro-social activities for youth, and typically high-risk youth. And they were really trying to look and do kind of a literature review of what all of those organizations, through interviews, through a lot of qualitative data collection, on what a lot of those organizations defined as characteristics around building trust. What does that look like? I love this picture. I just got it off the internet. I don't know who it is, but it just embodies trust to me. You breathing somebody else's life force, right? Sharing that breath and really thinking about what that means in terms of being connected to another person. And when we're thinking about the approaches that they brought down from that study, is looking at obviously respecting youth, and what does that mean to youth as defined respect, building rapport, the consistency factor continued to come up, was consistently there. Being consistent as a healthy adult, and occupying a nuanced adult role, which, you know, is a little bit like a high school coach, a little bit maybe like a teacher. Sometimes you're kind of taking on a parental role. There's just little nuances within the relationship that adjusts and is flexible at when it's needed, that you can provide that kind of overall level of support, depending on what the need is. Read into it, build upon it, and provide that type of approach and support when you need it. Were 4 of these that came out of this study that really looked at how building trust can happen. So doesn't necessarily mean that if you take one of these out, trust is gone, but they were kind of found that the presence of these 4 kind of areas were really critical in developing higher levels of trust with youth. They define this is defined as really looking at someone, if we're thinking about, if we go back to that initial chat box, who you trusted when you were in adolescence. One of the things that we really think about is, would they take me seriously if I said something? And maybe even if I said something rather provocative, or would they call me, you know, drama queen? What would that look like if I came to someone as an adolescent and really provided some maybe intense information? Would I be taken seriously? And would that adult be dependable and act in a responsible, caring, in my opinion, responsible way? Those are looking at how definitions around what trusted adult for these purposes of what a trusted adult is. When we really look at how the trusted adult, what types of elements are, I thought this was really interesting. This is from a study developing a taxonomy of characterized trusted adult support in the lives of adolescents. And it's really thinking about, so if we're trying to manualize this and give you guys tools tomorrow on what this looks like to implement with it and build trust with a youth, how are we accessible? Are we approachable? Are we attentive to what they're saying? Are we available and engaged? Are we authentically coming to the table is basically what that means. What types of emotions, right? Are we empathetic? Do we understand what empathetic listening is? Do we practice it with them? Are we sensitive and nurturing to what they're saying? And are we really hearing and listening, or are we just responding and trying to problem solve? Is what's so easy and such a quick thing for us adults to do is, oh, you have a problem? Here's the solution. When oftentimes we just want to be heard, right? Really, like, what are we functioning as? What is our role with them? Are we, and really clarifying that. So even if we're doing an interaction to build trust, like you're being curious, you're coming with authentic curiosity. But when we're thinking about what that looks like, we can even say, do you want me to just listen? Are you just going to confide in me? Or do you want me to help, you know, come up with some solutions? And maybe they'll say, I really just want you to listen. And so that's what our function is. We just listen, right? Or if they want to say, I really need to know what, you know, what is going to happen next, or what should I do? What are my options? And then we can kind of look at helping them think through those things. And so what is our function? What is our role? Is it an advisor? Are we the coach? What does that look like? And how are we doing it without judgment, which is key. The moment you think that we're judging them for whatever they're doing or engaging in or not engaging in, that judgment is so easy to go to. But how do we come at it with a real non-judgmental approach? Okay, and then there was this really nice little part of this taxonomy that was developed that is a very easy, and I know we're about to run out of time, this time goes by very quickly, is really looking at a quick little approach, TAP. Are we trustworthy? Are we generous with our time as it allows? Because obviously we have to have, we're not, call me at any time of the night, I'll answer. We're not those people, we're not crisis responders, right? But we can always refer to those resources. Are we approachable? Like I was saying, are we authentic? Are we available? And then look at how and what it means to role model.
You have my purple pen.
How do we provide, sorry, that's, somebody is probably needing to mute. How do we provide and be a positive example around our interaction on a daily basis to provide that positive example of emotional regulation, talking through those things when we get stressed out, sharing that. Man, today was a stressful day. Here's what I have to do to rebalance myself. You know, I'm going to have to take a time out or a day off or a, can I just briefly talk to you about this? And then we really look at how we're able to role model all of those activities on a regular basis. Oh, sorry. So what now? So how do we, and what do we as a community, and I love the, of course, Heia Fish Pond images from looking at what a resilient community looks like, building upon, creating sustainability for our communities. How do we continually feed ourselves, our souls, our neighbors, our families, and create that compassionate, resilient community within itself? And what does that look like on a day-to-day practice for us? So this is the idea, this is the conversation. So what? So what now? So what do we do with this information? How do we continually build to create compassion and resilience and trusted relationships? I can look at people on this call right now and say, oh, that absolutely 100% trust. And I know they have trusting relationships, and it's so unbelievably helpful when we're building resilience within ourselves. So how do we as a collective, and this is just a question out there, where do we go to now? How do we continue on these efforts? Compassionate Koʻolaupoko is definitely providing these types of venues and opportunities. What else is there? What else are we doing to really build these strong foundational roots for our youth and our families and ourselves in these communities, right? Do we create as collectively and collective push forward, consistently looking at principled approaches? There's several initiatives happening right now, which is so exciting. I feel like at the very beginning of trauma-informed care talks that I was involved in back in 2006, and since, it's kind of like constantly trying to get people excited about trauma-informed care. And then the pandemic hit. It's like not a good thing for everyone else, but man, it's, you don't have to convince anybody anymore that we need to create trauma-informed responses, because now we're all experiencing quite high levels of stress. So fantastic response as a state and our communities that we're looking at to what our communities are needing right now. Lots of initiatives within the state departments. There's several bills right now that are going through the legislature and building momentum. Lots of nonprofits. I know I'm not naming all of them, but there are several more out there that are specifically taking up the concept and initiative of trauma-informed care that just adds to the idea of building trusting relationships. And then of course, community advocacy efforts, formalized ones and very informal ones. So what that really comes down to, in my opinion, is really how do we each initially look inward and create balance, and then model that out and continually build upon the principles that are so kind of intrinsically within lots of many cultures and within our community here for centuries. So building upon what has already been, the foundation has already been laid, and we're just continuing to nurture and grow that. So thank you so much. I know I'm a couple of minutes over, but I wanted to take some time to really look at doing a question and answer piece. I know that there were several, I'm not sure if there was anything in the chat. I didn't have an opportunity to look, but if you folks have any questions or comments about the content, we can share the information if you folks want. There's several articles that were referenced that were really fascinating around what that means to be a trusting adult. But if anybody has any thoughts or comments, feel free to put them in the chat box. Or if Josh or Nathan had anything that was sent in that I didn't see. Are there any questions or comments? Responses, criticisms, whatever, anyone out there? Okay, here's a question. What can you do for a youth who refuses help? Do you have any good tips on how to motivate them? Yeah, you know, I mean, there's several practitioners on this call right now who could answer this question. And there's probably just as many variety of answers within it. But when we're really looking at resistance, right? And how a very social working approach to resistance is, we roll with resistance in which way, right? We create, does that mean the refusal of help? What does that mean? Does it mean that they don't trust you? Does it mean that they're not in a brain space and feel safe enough to change anything? Does that mean that they're in chaotic stress and in traumatic situations? There's so many things that can mean. Does it mean that they simply are a teenager and they think they know everything? I mean, there's all different types of reasons why youth aren't ready, but the consistency fact, the thing that always comes up in research is consistency. Just because they say no this time doesn't mean we stop trying, right? Or just because they refuse help doesn't mean we go, oh, forget you, then I'm not really interested in working with you if I'm gonna have to work harder than you. Which there's a point, we don't wanna work harder than anybody else in a relationship. There needs to be an equal amount. But how do we really get to the bottom of that, of the reason why they're refusing help? So to me, motivation really looks at just trying to find ways to connect. How do you, in completely generic terms, even like, oh, do you like donuts? I love donuts, but where's your favorite donut place? Just little ways of connecting and finding commonality. Or doing something together that you're not sitting there looking straight up on. I always like the idea of having a sensory box. I speak about that often, of a little tool that helps with grounding techniques. It's often used in occupational therapy, but it's just even like a little plastic, box with a lid and in the back of your car, and you pull it out and you have things to play with. I love kinetic sand. I like to play with it. I like to put it in my hands as this kind of a anxiety thing to kind of calm myself, but they're sensory stimulation techniques that often can help ground kids into a moment. And so maybe even looking at just playing, and depending on how old the child is, age appropriate, right? Activities, but just really taking it back, because they're not there yet. They're not ready for the help, but we consistently check in, we consistently offer, we consistently try different ways to engage. I hope that helps. And if anybody else has any other thoughts, again, there's practitioners on here that are brilliant, so feel free to chime in. Anything else? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can ask you the next one.
Okay.
So Lisa asked, what tips do you have to help students stay steady while other pieces of their lives are chaotic?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd like somebody to answer that for me right now. Yeah, how do we do it? How do we stay steady when there's lots of pieces of chaos going on? I think it would be the same thing. We really role model balance. We really pay attention to what we need. We really provide a calm environment. So again, the energy that we're bringing to the interaction, to the table, to the room, to the conversation every day. If I come in all frantic and whirled around, you're going to feel it immediately. If I come in as a hurricane, you're going to feel it. But if I come in as a calm day on the ocean and just kind of going with the waves as they move along, you'll feel that too. And so will the youth. And so it's really looking at, think about what we do, the healthy things that we do, because there's healthy things that we do and there's not so healthy things that we do. So thinking about the healthy ways that we stay steady, even with uncontrollable chaos happening all around us. And share there's nothing wrong with sharing how we do it ourselves without providing, too personal information about ourselves. I'm not sure if that helps, but, and any other questions, Josh?
Yeah, so I think this one relates a little bit to what you were just saying. So I'll just see if you have anything to add, and then I can get to the next one. So Kelsey asks, sometimes we adults also have our own baggage. Sometimes what the youth are going through triggers us. How do we continue to be that consistent adult and balance that with our need to recenter and unpack our own emotions?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, we absolutely have our own baggage, and we absolutely get triggered. So there's nothing wrong with being honest and transparent, because they're going to feel it anyway. They're going to see that, and then that trust is going to start to diminish. So being transparent around what we need when we get triggered. Right now, I'm feeling really stressed because of an interaction that I just had, or I'm feeling really, anxious about what I was just saying, or what we were saying, or however you want to approach it. And sometimes when I get anxious, I need to do this, this, and this. So I'm going to go ahead and do it really quickly. And then, I want you to know that you're not the only one that gets stressed out. You're not alone in that concept. We all get stressed out. Just because I'm an adult, don't mean that I have it figured out and have the answers. So we acknowledging that baggage, and I'll use the same term that Kelsey wrote, acknowledging that we have baggage. We don't want to give details of our trauma histories. That's not necessarily appropriate, but we can connect on the emotion. So I don't need to give you the detail of my trauma, but I can let you know, I know what it feels like to be scared. I know what it feels like to be completely powerless and out of control. And it's not a fun place to sit. And that's your connection. You recognize, and they recognize, that triggers happen to humans, right? And then we figure out and communicate how we balance ourselves. This is what I need to do on a regular basis to make sure I'm balanced, and however words we want to use, right? But those are the concepts. We identify their emotion. We identify the emotion within ourselves to be able to connect. I don't need to tell you, oh, I'm this kind of survivor too, because this was what happened to me when I was 15. But we can always share, oh man, yeah, I know what it feels like to be overwhelmed in life and not know which way to turn, and not know how to take another step forward. I know what that feels like. Happens to me a lot. And you just maybe even stop there. And that's your empathetic kind of connection. It's really hard to sit in that space, and then just be quiet and just kind of be okay to sit in that emotion and be right next to them to sit there. And that sometimes can really help that empathetic connection really spark that ability for the youth to kind of open up. But letting them know that we're human, and trauma is pervasive. It's pervasive in our communities. And a lot of us, many of us, when we look at the definition of trauma, we're trauma survivors. So how does that look in our own lives? And when we get triggered and when we need our own timeout. So yes, I hope that helped.
Thanks, Tia. So Aries has a question, and then Elsie has a thought to share, and then probably
Okay.
we'll wrap up. So from Aries, our organization helps with matching elementary and middle school children with caring and dedicated mentors who are teens and adults. Our main problem is connecting with the parents, especially during the pandemic. How do we rebuild our connection with those parents and inform them that we would like to help their children? Meanwhile, the parents themselves are not as responsive, and sign up their kids for the program. Any comments or tips?
Connecting with parents. It's every family's so different, right? So the approaches have got to be so vastly unique and individualized. And that's a really big question. How do we connect and get families' attentions when they could be dealing with ongoing stress and traumatic chaos in their lives on a day-to-day basis? So even getting them a moment to say, hey, your kid is in this program. We want to help them, but we need your attention for a couple of papers or whatever that looks like. It can be there. I think I don't have a great answer for that other than we have to keep trying. And again, there's practitioners on here that run programs out there. I see Kenai Ehas on here, and they reach out to families, and they work with youth that are transitioning into developing work skill building for workforce development. It's difficult, right, to reach out to and get connected, especially in this virtual setting, especially with technical difficulties. And with attention being so divided. So I mean, to me, it's like we don't give up. We don't give up. We try different things. We don't keep trying the same thing over and over and over. So if we're calling, and we don't get through, maybe we shouldn't keep calling. Maybe we should try and do a different way or offer a different piece or however that might look. But it's the creativity and the sharing. So if anybody wants to throw in the chat box on things that's worked for their parents and outreaching to their parents and their organizations, please feel free. Yeah, that'd be great. I don't have any great one answer that would work for all families. That's a hard one.
Thanks, Tia. So Elsie, if you'd like to share your thought, if you wouldn't mind keeping it to about a minute or so Tia can respond, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, just real quick, as a cultural practitioner and being trained culturally, and going back to the earlier question about having your youth or your student to refocus, depending on whatever they went through. There's an exercise that we do where we, in order for that person to get centered again, we go through this. You close your eyes and you find that place. You look for that place and find that place that you were at most peace, find your peace at. It could be out in the ocean, sitting on a surfboard, could be hiking up in the mountains, could be in the forest. But wherever that place is, then you take yourself to that place and you go through the whole the 6 senses of that place: the taste, the touch, the smell, smelling the lehua, feeling the rain, all of those things. So that's an exercise that we do. There are a lot of exercises very similar to that, but then have that student stay in that space for a while. Have him move around, walk around, swim, whatever he's feeling, whatever he's seeing, and let him just kind of bask in that space. And even you can do it too while he's doing it or she's doing it. And then come back. When you gradually come back, then give them the opportunity to share and also how you share and how you feel at that point that you were there and how you feel now. And it's a really good exercise to practice. I do it all the time. Mahalo.
I love that. I think those types of practices are so critical, and whatever we respond to and sharing those with others, especially youth and families that we work with, that's so awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Elsie. I think the more that we know ourselves and what works for ourselves in terms of emotional regulation and grounding and sensory stimulation to help with stress management and coping, the more we can, and the more we experiment with our own techniques and skills, the more we can share with the youth and families, and the more we have a conversation and with our communities. I wish this was another hour so I could just listen to you folks talk and listen and really see what works for folks and what you all do, because just what Elsie was saying might perfectly help another organization that's on here and be able to say, I'm going to try and do a body, that's like body as imagery, that's visualization, that's body scanning, all of that. That's all sensory stimulation types of activities to ground somebody. So those are fantastic. So yeah, however, there's forums to share is so critical. I wish we were all in person and could now talk story in little groups. That's what I miss about the situation. So, but thank you so much for being on here. I'll turn it over to Josh and Nathan. Mahalo, everybody.
Mahalo, Tia. We really, really appreciate you and the expertise you shared. There was a question about the slides, and for those who are interested, we can share those. We'll send out the recording. I really appreciate all of you taking the time to be here. I know we had folks from communities on almost every island, I think, actually, and it's awesome that everybody was able to be here. Please, when we send out the recording, if you think there are others who would be interested, please share. Also, I'd invite all of you, if there are resources that you know of related to this topic or other topics that you'd like to share and get out to people, you can send them to us at info@compassionatekoʻolaupoko.org. A couple last things. At compassionatekoʻolaupoko.org, you can find a place to connect with our social media, where we're going to start doing more announcements, and also to contact us if you have ideas or resources you'd like to share. We are going to try to have a similar type of session at least once a month, and so keep a lookout for that. And thank you guys so much for being here. I hope you have a good rest of your day and week.